George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation, celebrating people we feel good about here in the Community Inspiration Hour. We're so pleased to be joined by Cjala, Surratt, and Emad Rahim. They are the parents of two daughters, and school is starting, right? And so we wanted to get the perspective of parents who have school-age children and what the impact of the changes are, of what the district is talking about, the Syracuse City School District, among others, and other districts. We'll get all of that explained. But Cjala, let me begin with you. What is your concern about what's happening, and how are you adjusting? How did you adjust last year? Both you and Emad can answer that, but I'll start with you.
Oh, how did we adjust? I think that in the beginning, because like everyone else, we didn't know what was going on. You know, we weren't sure. I mean, I'll say that when the kids came home, it really felt like that we would navigate this, and then within a couple of weeks, the kid would be back. Right. So I think it's been touch and go. I think we weren't sure. And, you know, we kind of rode the wave like we did with like the school did with the teachers and everything else. I will say, though, that it got very difficult. It got very difficult because the reality is I'm not a teacher. And a lot of the different things that my child needed, particularly my youngest, I wasn't necessarily able to speak to or help her with. And the school district really wasn't able to help either because they were trying to figure out this new thing called COVID.
So describe your family. You have two daughters. What schools do they go to?
So we have Surratt, who's our eldest, who is 17, who attends Syracuse Academy of Science. And then we have Sophia, our youngest, who attends the Syracuse Latin School.
So two different districts, right? So talk about that.
So two different districts, two very different personalities, as I'm sure most people, you know, parents have with their children. So our eldest is pretty self-sufficient at this point. You know, when she received her work, you know, we just kind of checked in, made sure that she was following along. With our youngest, who's 8, she needs a lot more hand-holding and, you know, having to check in and make sure that she's focused. So yeah, in that regard, it's been interesting.
And were you working from home at the time, or did you have a job? I mean, did you work outside the house and then you have to come back in, or you had a job at a different, how did that all work out?
Yes. So I work at the university, and on March 13th, they sent us home. And again, it was the same kind of feeling when the kids came home was, okay, well, we'll see you. Everyone left their mugs and left their work and anticipated coming back. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's a major thing that has to be discussed is that, you know, the school day and the work day run concurrently. And it's extremely difficult when there's expectations at work, and then there are the responsibilities of trying to keep your kid on task. And sometimes we failed miserably, and on both ends, you know, in terms of job expectations and what the school expected of us as parents.
That's straight up honesty. Emad, what do you say?
I concur with my wife said. You know, I was fortunate because I was already working remote. Right. So the transition wasn't that big for me, except the schedule was, right? Because now I had to change my schedule to make sure my youngest daughter was getting what she needed throughout the day. I also had to, you know, make sure she's occupied when there's no lessons happening. So it went from me working throughout the day, being a part of conference calls and attending meetings and so forth, to really working more late in the evening after the kids had went in bed and stuff like that. And then juggling our schedule because now she's working remote. So now we're both, you know, fighting over who gets what room for these Zoom conferences, right? So you have to be upstairs, I have to be downstairs so we don't overlap in our conference calls. And then at the same time, we got to make sure our daughter's nice and quiet, especially in the younger one. And that the older one, and while the older one was pretty set in regards to how she manages things and how independent she is, we also had to make sure that mentally she was okay. You know, she was losing her friends. Also, her entire routine was different, and she was worried about what was going to happen in the future in regards to a senior year moving forward, career opportunities, college, all these things was on her mind. So we also worry about that.
You know, many of us were fortunate, right? Because like in our household, everybody was able to maintain, we were all working throughout the whole thing, right? We all still had jobs, and many families did not have that same option or privilege, if you will. So in some ways, right, if you think it was hard for you, right, how hard was it for other people, right? Does that ever resonate for you?
Absolutely, because throughout this, the Syracuse City School District has had town halls with parents and would break us out into different spaces in which we could be in conversation. And the reality is absolutely that. I see the different kind of conversations going on online about, do we go back, do we not? But I heard parents who said, I don't have everything you just said, George. I don't have a partner. I don't have, family nearby who can take care of the children during the day. I don't have any of those resources, those supplemental resources where I can navigate this. And unfortunately, a lot of people are working in jobs where the employer will say, well, if you can't come in, we can find someone else. So the realities are so starkly different for different people throughout this thing we're trying to navigate.
Yeah, even things that we take for granted that we assume parents automatically have, like wireless, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like many parents mentioned, they did not have internet connection,
Mm-hmm.
that they were dependent on the library, which was also closed, right? They may be dependent on going to a local cafe, which is also closed. They didn't have a laptop. They often used the library for their PC related things, or they got a loaner from the school district, but now the school district is overwhelmed. They don't have enough laptops for everybody. So we definitely thought about that, and we did our best to help people as much as we can, and got involved in different organizations to raise money to get PCs and laptops and Chromebooks for kids. We raised awareness in regards to inequality in regards to internet access and food disparities, and stuff, because also lunch was a huge thing, lunch and breakfast. So we worked with the Good Life Foundation. I'm on the board, and we worked in regards to also delivering food and other type of meal items to families that may not have vehicles to actually get those items.
And I think Emad and I have talked about this quite a bit. I think that's the frustration. The frustration is that COVID is a piling on of things that were already happening within our Syracuse city. So it's only exacerbated these issues, these disparities that he's talking about. So those things that hadn't been fixed before are now really, 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 a heavy, heavy burden on households who don't necessarily have any of these different supports. And I think that's been what's been frustrating for me, is kind of watching parents try to navigate this and do their very best. And there seems to be a lot of justification, judgment happening out there about, what parents should or shouldn't be doing. But I also, spoke up in one of the meetings and said, you have to understand, when you're emailing and you're connecting and you're Zooming, that sometimes you're actually talking to the eldest in the household. You're not even talking to an adult, because the adult is out there trying to work and keep the lights on.
Yeah.
And, and that eldest in the household is trying to maintain their work, and then their siblings and another sibling. So it's a lot of different moving parts that I think everyone's trying to find a way through.
Yeah, so do we, I guess, and I don't have school age children, they're both in college, or we have 2 in college, or 3, I guess. But the fact is, do we really understand the impact of this remote and distance learning on families, as you just described? Do we really get it? That's what I'm trying to understand. Do you think we get it?
No, I think there's a population, percentage of parents that do find it convenient. People that felt like now they had more times with their children, that they that actually teach their kids the way they want, that they think that they should be taught, right? But that's often out of privilege, right? These are parents that may have the time to do so, may have the means to do so, may have the education to do so. But I think the majority of parents were frustrated, and not necessarily at the school district, but with how the structure is laid out, inconsistency in communication, a lot of uncertainty, right? So I think those were the things that were more stressful for parents and children also, and even teachers. I mean, that impacted teachers too. We can't forget about the problems that the teachers are facing, and their level of anxiety. Do they go back to teaching or not? Is there enough PPE in the schools? Is there enough technology for the kids that they are teaching online? Do they have time to teach online? But also they're teaching their children at the same time. We don't want to forget about that many of these teachers also have children that are also in the school district.
Oh yeah, let's talk about that, because that's a piece that we really haven't talked about, Cjala.
Well, yeah, a specific, there was an incident in which my youngest was having one of her Zoom sessions. She had about once a week, she had a one-on-one Zoom session with her teacher. It was excellent. But at one point we went to log on and she said, "Could you just give me a minute? I have to put my baby down." So we're not thinking about that they have all these different things that just like we are navigating in our homes, they are trying to navigate with the added responsibility of educating our children. So it's all these different moving parts. But one universal thing that I heard in these different meetings with parents that crosses across socioeconomic backgrounds is the mental state of our children.
Yeah, talk about that.
And I don't as much, I think we've been caught up in the logistics, which are essential. But I keep saying, like, when these kids go back, you know, where are the supports? They've been home with their families who've been keeping them very close, who've been making sure they don't touch things or be around certain people. And now we're sending them into spaces of ultimate, eventually, right now it's remote. So what will that mean? What will that mean to them when they're in these spaces where they cannot have gym? They cannot go to the lunchroom.
Right.
They cannot, you know, they can't engage their peers. There's no trading of toys. So what will it mean to have to just sit, particularly for the younger kids,
with
just
a mask on?
With a mask on, right? So I'm just wondering about, you know, as we move towards October, at least for the Syracuse City School District, when they make an assessment as to if they can go back to the hybrid model, how are they really going to be prepared for maybe the mental state of these children who also, again, we don't know what's been happening in their homes. Have they lost family members? Have people lost jobs? What other stressors have been happening in those households that are now going to be in the classroom?
Yeah. And we know that domestic violence, for example, and things of that nature, also were on the increase during this time as well. And so whatever you were living in has been exacerbated by this pandemic, pretty much, right? Yeah. Do you think that the district, so how is it different for SAS, the Syracuse Academy of Science? How is it different? How is it the same?
Well, the Syracuse Science Academy is a charter school, right? It's still a city school because in the city they go by the same rules, same regulations, and things like that. They follow a more of a private type of process, right? So they're more limited in resources, I would say, right? It's a smaller school, smaller population. They're not unionized, so often there's retention issues with faculty. Mm-hmm. And that was a big thing we noticed, that once COVID happened, my oldest daughter, lost at least half of her teachers, right? Right away. Right away, right? And a lot of it is because some of these parents, they had, there was two parents that were also educators in these households. Right. So some of these parents had to make a decision, like, we can't both be in these schools and also manage our kids at the same time. If we both go back to school teaching and one of us gets sick, what does that mean for our kids? Right. Or both of us get sick. What does that mean for our kids? Right. So many of them had to make the hard decision that one of us have to quit and watch our children.
Yeah. So different. By the way, I never said Dr. Emad Rahim. Let me just do that and get that out the way, because I should have done that earlier. So sorry about that, Dr. Emad Rahim. But do you feel like the district? Oh, you want to say something, Cjala?
Well, no, it was interesting because we're talking about who's leaving the workforce, and it's a conversation, at least amongst a lot of my female friends, is that again, about talking about disparities being exacerbated, is that statistically men are still paid more. And so when these conversations are happening in households, that oftentimes we're seeing an excess of women from the workforce. So it's all these different ripple effects that at some point we're going to have to circle back and see what the implications are.
Are you looking at that decision in your own household?
We talked about it.
We've talked about it. At this juncture, it doesn't seem like it's something we're going to have to do. But again, school starts in 2 weeks. We'll see what ultimately happens.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I do work remote, but there was also at least 20% of my job that requires me to fly all over the country. And part of that flexibility is, the children are in school most of the time. So my wife had the flexibility to pick them up from school and things like that. But if they're home every day and I'm flying out of the country, for example, what does that mean for babysitting, right? What does that mean for household management, things like that? So we had that conversation. If it looked like that, what should we do? How should we move forward? Do we get a babysitter? Do we, drop them off at a family member's house, things like that? Or do one of us have to, look at our employment situation and figure out what is the best option?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Do you feel like the district has been responsive, because I had Jaime on, superintendent of Syracuse City Schools, and he talked about, we're studying, we're doing a survey, and, the teachers had asked for a November date to reopen. But then he said, well, we're listening, we're constantly surveying our teachers. And so they met them an eighth of a way, right? By moving the school day, to the 14th of September, as opposed to this week, although teachers are in school this week doing remote learning in the school. These are right in the building, but it's a whole other thing. So do you feel like that the district is being responsive to the concerns or not?
I think they're making a lot of effort.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they're making a lot of effort, and I think the other problem too is that this is a moving target, right? Because as the federal mandates change, they have to then be nimble and change too.
Right.
I think that it is very difficult because of the things we've discussed. There's a lot of people who need, not just want, need their children to be back in school. We haven't even got into, there are people who have children who have different learning disabilities,
mm-hmm.
and ultimately need to, have those extra supports in terms of their children learning. So I think they're making, I'm trying not to hedge because I feel like it's very difficult because we also know that the mayor has made dramatic cuts that then, affects their bottom line. So I've listened in on meetings where they're really trying to figure out where can we find the monies to do what we need to do? How can we offer the proper supports in terms of technology disparity, the Wi-Fi disparity? So there's so many different moving parts to this. I think there's a lot of effort, but I also know from parents there's a lot of frustration, because I don't think it's a lack of transparency, but in terms of communicating that they don't know, which I'm sure is hard for an institution to do, to really just say, we don't know.
Do you think that would be satisfactory if they said that?
I'm sorry?
Do you think that would be satisfactory if they said, we don't know?
I think it would be honest instead of radio silence. I think to say, because I think to say, I don't know, but we're actively in these meetings trying to figure it out. It is a different position.
Emad and Cjala, is there, as we wrap, what is, if any, hope do you have about this process, even in this uncertainty as we go forward? And you may say, I don't have any hope at all, but because let's be honest, I mean, both of you, outside of being parents of two children in school, you're also activists in the community, and some of that showed up a little bit when you talked about how you're trying to support other families in their situation. So maybe the question is not as hope, but maybe the question is, so where do you think we go from here?
Yeah, I think one of the good things that is coming out of this is parents and teachers are communicating more with each other, right? I think there are a lot more parents that were disconnected, and sometimes they had to be disconnected because of their work, because of family dynamics. They're more involved. They're asking questions that they would have never asked, right? And then also teachers are having relationships with parents in a level that they probably wouldn't have had if it wasn't for COVID. Like teachers actually calling households to check in on students, checking in on parents, providing updates. My youngest daughter, she had an amazing teacher. We were constantly on the phone with her, and if my daughter missed a Zoom call, for example, she would call me immediately just to make sure everything's okay. If my daughter was acting up on Zoom, she would make sure that we are aware of that. So I think in that aspect, the community's coming together. We've seen it in volunteerism, in raising money for children and resources and things like that. So I'm hopeful in regards to that. But I'm still concerned and have a lot of anxiety on what the future is going to look like for these kids going forward.
Yeah, and I guess what I think of, Cjala, and you can finish up, is all of the lost instruction, if you will, for families and young people who were not able to be connected for so long, and where that, how do you feel that learning gap? Cjala, you have the last word.
Well, I mean, I think it's good to end on hope, right? You asked Emad about hope, and I think that's a good place because that's what I'm trying to communicate to my daughters, right? And I would circle back to, I think it's okay to say, I don't know, to say it's okay to say that we're confused, but that we are indeed in it together, trying to navigate it together. And that that everyone, I do believe, with all the moving parts and the difficulties, really is trying to move us to a place where the children can learn and can be healthy, that the administrators, the teachers, that everyone's involved has to come in contact with each other, that we'll be safe and be able to return to a place in which the children can learn and thrive.
I appreciate that. Cjala, you have, you work for Lightwork. You've got an exhibit. Talk about that real quick before we go.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'm the communications coordinator at Lightwork Gallery, and we currently have a exhibition up called In Solidarity, Syracuse Protests, which covers the protests that happened over the summer in regards to police brutality and racism. And it's quite powerful. So there were local photographers who were capturing images and documenting and archiving the protests that happened throughout the city, that happened at City Hall, and it's quite moving. And unfortunately, at this time, we can't have in the general public, but we are waiting again for those federal mandates to allow us to have people in the space.
Well, can you get a radio host up in there?
I can definitely get a radio host up in there.
All right. Cjala, Surratt, Emad, Rahim, Dr. Emad Rahim, parents of 2 school-age children. They're sharing the concerns that many of us have as parents in the schools in our community. What's coming up next? How do we navigate it? They're just like you, trying to deal with it as it comes. You heard some hope. You also heard some anxiety, and that's life, right? Emad Rahim, Cjala, Surratt, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us on.
For the nation.